Shalom, and another exciting edition of Torah Watchman Show, presented to you by none other than your humble host, the Karaite Jew here, hailing from Kent Mills, Silver Spring, Maryland, United States of America, the country I love. I was born here. Yes, I don't make any excuses for that because I served my country 20 years. I'm a combat war veteran in the United States Air Force and 100% disabled. Yes, I have $4,000 of ear technology, earphones, and I have high frequency deafness. So I love amplification. I didn't lose my hearing like a lot of people did when they're 18 years old with heavy metal music, even though I listen to my share of music. All kidding aside, I welcome all the new members to my new Facebook group, it's called Karaite for the United States East Coast, okay? There's several groups out there. There's some groups out there in Europe, and there's several Karaite groups there on the West Coast. The American Karaite Judaism is a Facebook portal for that group as well. And then they have various different points of view of Karaite Judaism and some sort of diametrically opposed viewpoints with rabbinical Judaism as well. You just check them out and then make a decision for yourself if you feel comfortable at home. But I do invite you to my new Facebook portal because, my wife and I, we through proclamation, declaration of intent, we have left rabbinical Judaism forever. And we have declared ourselves by philosophical worldview that we are Torah purist, that we are Tanakh and nothing else than a Jewish Bible. Even though we respect the rabbis of old, we do, of blessed memory. Those people like Rashi and Ramban and Nachmanides, other people there, Johannes, other people that you could read about, and the Babylonian Talmud and Jerusalem Talmud and so on. I have those annals in my library and everything else, but they're an historical record. Okay, they're opinionated, formed about 2,000 or more opinions of the scribes and rabbis, literally arguing a boxing match, like Ali and Frazier, whatever, literally, yes, arguing and fighting, and that is not halakha, folks. Even though the rabbinites would disagree with me and call me a blasphemer, whatever, to each their own, if I said that, but it's true. According to Judaism, for anyone that's coming into this, to my channel on YouTube, Word and Board, with Rabbi ben-Emmett, with my YouTube videos, just understand that I have transitioned and I've come out of the closet, rabbinical Judaism, and I've left that behind me. I'm no longer promoting that. So if anyone is thinking about converting to Judaism, advise them not to go to the orthodoxy side, because there's a lot of pain there. There's really a lot of pain there. And it's better, and you will have a more intimate relationship with Elohim, the Lord your God. I promise you. If you focus on a Karaite mindset, it essentially means, again, the Torah, the Navim, the sacred writings, and nothing else. In other words, God does not need any help to embellish his Torah. It's a perfect divine product. If it's not divine, then it's subject to speculation, objectivity, subjective reasoning, and things like that. You'll find it in the Talmud. So the rabbis who wrote the Talmud, mostly the Middle Ages, 11th century, 12th century, and so on, and some in the Babylonian age, with the Sanhedrin and other tractates of those, they imply that God did not get it completely right. And they imply that what was included in the Torah, primarily the 5 books of the Torah, what we're talking about, and the prophets, they imply that there's not enough information there to make good decisions for this generation. God does not need our help for his Torah, okay? And I got into some discussions. Where I'm going is, the title of this Torah Watchman Show is the Prophet Obadiah, specifically in his prophecy against Edom. I got into some arguments with some Karaite Jews. In fact, they kicked me out of their group. Now, why did they kick me out of their group? Was that being hostile? Was that spreading Lashon Hara and embarrassing things about other people? No. You know what I did? I posted the Haftarahs by Yishlach, the last parsha we had. That Haftarahs, folks, is Obadiah, the subject of this Torah Watchman Show. Many of you may have not heard of the Prophet Obadiah. I have a quick bio and some dating here. Obadiah was a minor prophet. When I say minor prophet, essentially it's that his coverage of his prophecy did not include all of Israel. Now, this is subject to your opinion as far as the dating of when Obadiah lived and when he actually gave his prophecy to Israel at that time, who was pretty much cut off and in exile, and he was speaking primarily to the people of Judea. So there's several different interpretations here as far as when he was born and when the prophecy occurred and who the people that he was talking to as far as the kings and other fellow prophets. So stay with me. This is a very interesting show here because it deals with something that some Karaite Jews thought was scandalous, and they actually told me what I reported was stupid. Well, you know, the Torah Watchman here, I don't post anything about the Torah unless I'm absolutely sure of it. In other words, reading from the Torah to you, I'm not going to give you a lot of commentary from the Talmud because that is just subjective reasoning. I like to focus on objective reasoning from multiple peer-reviewed sources, and that's where I'm at here. I have a transcript, so if you see me switching pages, you know I am switching back and forth to some information that is the basis and the baseline for this this Torah Watchman Show this evening. So the date of composition is disputed and is difficult to determine due to the lack of information regarding the prophet Obadiah. Okay? Obadiah is known primarily by Jews, of course, but it's also different iterations, Christians, and even our Muslim brothers too. In Islam, they have some ideas about Obadiah too. But bear with me. Because Obadiah wrote about Edom, there is a foregone conclusion here. There are two generally accepted dates. Excuse me. The first is 853 to 841 BCE. That's a long time ago. Okay? When Jerusalem was invaded by the Philistines and the Arabs during the reign of Jehoram of Yehuda, recorded in 2 Kings chapter 8:20 through 22. You can also look up this passage in 2 Chronicles chapter 21 verses 8 through 20. The earlier period would place Obadiah as a contemporary of the prophet of Eliyahu. This is probably the most favored interpretation by rabbinics as far as the belief on the dating, okay? Jewish traditions favor the earlier date because the Jewish Talmud identifies Obadiah as an Edomite himself, which is really interesting. He had a prophecy against Edom, but he came, part of his family lineage came from Edom. So, descendant of actually Eliphaz the Temanite, or a friend of Job. You know, Job, you hear about him? Another minor prophet who lived, we're not sure exactly when he lived, but it was after the flood, after the time of Noah, more than likely. But anyway, the other date is probably closer to what's true and accurate. This is the year 607 through 586 BCE, okay? So when Jerusalem was attacked by King Nebuchadnezzar II. Okay? Babylon, when he led the Babylonian exile of Israel, recorded in the book of Psalms, chapter 137, the latter date would place Obadiah as contemporary of the prophet Jeremiah, not Eliyahu. Okay? The interpreter of the Bible states this. The political situation implied in the prophecy points at a time after the exile. When I said there were two major exiles here, there was the Assyrian exile, the 9.5 tribes were taken out of northern Israel into foreign lands, essentially, by the king of Assyria. And then there was a Babylonian attack, King Nebuchadnezzar II, who came in and destroyed Judea and removed essentially most of the populace there and carried them off to Babylonia. So after the exile, probably in the mid-5th century BCE, no value can be attributed to traditions identifying the prophet of King Ahab's steward. And I'm just quoting information here. So the Babylonian Talmud, the Sanhedrin 39 Bravo, or with the king Ahaziah captain. These are different individuals, different points of time that wrote about Obadiah and try to bring clarity to these different records and dating of Obadiah. Because, you have a contemporary prophet, a minor prophet, who either lived way back in 800 BCE or closer 600 BCE. So contemporaries of either Eliyahu or Jeremiah. Okay? Now, the vision of Obadiah, according to the Talmud, and the reason why I'm going to cover the Talmud here, because Obadiah is an ambiguous character. We don't know a lot about his origins. We can only speculate, okay? And that's when we get in trouble with the Torah, with the Jewish Bible. We start speculating, go in a rabbit's hole, and then we develop all these theories and hypotheses, and we're way out there and probably not accurate at all. But this vision that came to Obadiah is recorded in the books of the Talmud. These are typically traditional talking points that was passed down through the ages of Judaism over hundreds of years, maybe even 1,000 years or so, okay? But we know Obadiah is said to have been a convert to Judaism from Edom, and a lot of this happened. So God called him. God worked with a lot with Baal Teshuvah Jews and converts. In fact, God encouraged rabbis not to abuse these strangers, not to abuse these proselytes and these sojourners into the land, to encourage them to find truth in the Torah and join the tribe. This is interesting, okay, I thought. So a descendant of Eliphaz, the friend of Job, that's just the earlier day, is identified with Obadiah, who was a servant of Ahab. In other words, King Ahab and Jezebel. Well, he was I would say, court prophet per se, or sage or something like that. So Obadiah is supposed to have received the gift of prophecy for having hidden the 100 prophets from the persecution of Jezebel. Okay? There's really no hard evidence of this whatsoever, but it's an idea. It's something that was passed down through the ages, the word of mouth. Okay? Essentially. So he hid the prophets in 2 caves so that if those in one cave would be discovered, those in the other might escape. Okay? Obadiah was very rich, according to tradition. All his wealth was expended feeding the poor prophets until order to be able to continue to support them, he finally had to borrow money at interest from Ahab's son Jehoram. Okay? Obadiah's fear of God was one degree higher than Abraham. This is where you're getting to too many embellishments, and it's probably not correct. But it just makes the story interesting. I want to quantify fact from fiction here. Okay? We have 2 dates, possible dates for the prophet Obadiah, around the year of 800 BCE or 600 BCE. So who he was with at that time. We use these from historical milestones and scheduling. If he was at an earlier date, he would be with a certain king or fellow prophets, or if he was in a more more later date, he would be with different people too that could probably be as witnesses to document his account. So moving forward here, yes, I'm flipping through my papers. All right. So we're talking about Obadiah, possibly the dating is correct, in 800 BCE, that was in the house of Ahab, which is a northern king at that time. A very evil king. His wife was even more evil, and she was notorious for slaying prophets and the contemporaries of Eliyahu, and drove Eliyahu into hiding, into the mountains. There is a Christian account of also Obadiah. I'll cover that very briefly. It's interesting. I did not know the Christian talked a lot about Obadiah. But the story goes that he was born in Shechem. You remember that Canaanite city that Jacob's sons, Reuben and Levi, got in trouble with, the rape of Dinah and all of this. This is where Joseph, by tradition, is buried. But supposedly, according to Christian tradition, he was born there. And he's supposedly the third captain sent out by Ahaziah against Elijah. So he was in the court, according to the story, this use case, he's in the court of King Ahaz. The date of his ministry, supposedly, Christians like to say ministry, is unclear due to historical ambiguities in the book bearing his name, but is believed to be around 586 BCE. There is even a Russian Orthodox account of Obadiah in the 18th century. He's regarded as a saint among Eastern churches. There's actually a feast day, believe it or not, which I think is very fascinating, the 50th day of the Coptic month, Tobit. He's even discussed in the Byzantine period, Roman Catholicism. Various churches have Bibles that mention him, and also various datings of when he was born and when he was given his prophecies between the Julian calendar and the Gregorian calendar, so these dates slipped a little bit. He is celebrated on the 20th of February in Syriac and certain churches in Syria. And he's, of course, he's part of the Minor Prophets, Calendar of Saints, Armenian Apostolic Church on the 31st July. So you actually have Christians here that have dates in their calendar in which they celebrate as a memorial of the prophet of Obadiah. And I never thought he was really that important. But it seems like he was important to multiple generations of people over a period of time and different religions as well. So it's cross-dimensional here. According to old tradition, Obadiah is buried in Sebastia. And I'll show you a picture here, of Sebastia, where it's located. I had to look it up. It's the same site by tradition that Elisha, the protege of Eliyahu, Elijah, he's supposedly born in that area. I will show you that map so you can see where it is. I have not explored that area in Israel yet, but I plan to, of archaeological. So we finished a brief intro about Obadiah, and we have something I think is even more down in detail about the actual scripture per se in the book of Obadiah. Okay? Again, this was a Haftarah, a Parsha Vayishlach. The reason why this Haftarah was chosen for Parsha Vayishlach is because it was talking about Esau. It was talking about Esau's ancestry, his descendants. If you look at the very end of Parsha Vayishlach, it talks about Esau. He lived in the land of Seir, and he actually intermarried. His sons and daughters intermarried with that kingdom there. Okay, Edom was known as a great mountainous area, but the entire kingdom and territory of Edom was quite expensive because it extended almost into all of it was east of the Jordan River and extended south to almost northern Saudi Arabia and went north off the Dead Sea up in Amman and other areas, almost where Aram, Haran and those areas, Panaram, where Abraham came from, all the way north in that area. So the whole chunk of land was actually well known for grassy fields, brooks and streams, and water supply for raising sheep, essentially. Very fertile there. And also, by tradition, Esau loved to hunt the game and the deer there, whatever. That's why he settled there. Now, in verse 1 in Obadiah chapter 1, the vision of Obadiah, I'm going to read briefly as quickly as I can. So God was speaking to Obadiah through a vision. It was a night vision because God only spoke face to face to one prophet, and that was Moshe. So let's conclude it was a night vision. So he went to bed at night, and in certain times of the week, God would speak to him. He would wake up. I would imagine he had a little scroll there, and he probably wrote down notes and everything else that God told him exactly to account for based on the vision, the prophetic utterance, something that was futuristic and generationally important for Israel and Jews' life today. And I want to make that abundantly clear that this prophecy that I'm about to read to you, if I didn't have access to it now in the book of Obadiah, in our Tanakh, it would not be generation important because God wants you to know about it. And I want to open it up to you and share some very cool things. So bear with me. We have heard tidings from the Lord, and a messenger has been sent among the nations. Arise and let us rise up against them in war. So this is talk of war. During this time of Obadiah, there was contention with the land of Edom, the Edomites, okay? Now I'm going to read you a little bit of commentary here, okay? This isn't a Talmud. Just take it with a grain of salt, but I think it's interesting. Why is Obadiah different that he was chosen to prophesy concerning Edom and did not prophesy any other prophecy? Obadiah's sole mission in prophecy was about Edom and how it impacted Jewish exiles. So bear with me. Our sages of blessed memory, yes. Obadiah was an Edomite proselyte. There you hear that story again. Said the Holy One, Elohim, blessed be he, from them and in them will I bring upon them. So God chose the prophet Obadiah for the people of Israel during his time, who dwelt between two wicked people, okay? Ahab and Jezebel. If you believe that Obadiah lived around 800 BCE, that was a time of the northern kingdom when it still existed, and it was under the ruthless and evil rulers of King Ahab and his queen Jezebel, okay? He was a court puppet per se, a prophet, a sage, a wise man that had good favor in the court of Ahab, okay? So dealing with this issue here, Ahab and Jezebel did not learn from their deeds and come and impose retribution upon Esau, who dwelt between two righteous people, Esau and Rebekah. So there's parallels here, quickly. King Ahab and Jezebel. Then you had Obadiah caught between these two. Then you had Esau, who was caught between the righteous people of Esau and Rebekah. Esau did not learn from his evil deeds. Okay? He did not pay attention to the same classes, the same Torah classes per se, the same righteous learning that his brother Yaakov benefited from. And this was in Sanhedrin 39 Bravo. Okay? That's all I'm going to say. So, verse 2, behold, I have made you small among the nations, you are very despised. Okay? Israel, geographically, is one of the smallest nations on the planet. It really is, about the size of New Jersey. It's surrounded by people that absolutely hate Israel, and to this day, they want to destroy and wipe the Jewish nation off the face of the earth. the final solution for all anti-Semites and Amalekites, right? So, behold, I have made you small. In contrast, God works with small things to reveal big and large plans, okay? God wants the credit. He wants the glory. He deserves that because he created everything, right? And so he likes to work with small, humble entities, nations like Israel, people that are not of great renown. God builds these people up for his own glory. I just want to point that out, okay? So the idea of being despised is that God's people are despised because they represent a very peculiar, unique message that pretty much no one on earth has even heard of, or they just totally reject it. So in verse 3, the wickedness of your heart, it goes on. This is God speaking to Obadiah. Wickedness of your heart has enticed you to dwell in the clefts of the rock where habitation is high, who says to himself, who will bring down the earth? Okay? So people, evildoers, go and hide like rats go into dark places and hide, trying to hide accountability, transparency, and they believe they can hide their sinful deeds away from God by hiding in mountains, crevices, and things of that nature. Okay? Who dwells in the clefts of the rock, who relies on the support of ancestors, Abraham and Isaac, that they shall avail him, the promises of Abraham and Isaac. Read about that in Isaiah chapter 19, verse 17. The land of Judah shall be to Egypt for dread. There's various comparisons and metaphors here comparing the various state of Israel's life cycle as, something very humble to something very great, like the time of King Solomon, and when it began to fall into depravity and falling after heathen states and the heathen nations and worshiping other gods. And this is what part of the prophecy is, was led to the issue of Edom, okay? Verse 4, it says, if you go up high like the eagle, and if you place your nest among the stars, from there I will bring you down, says the Lord. So there were a lot of supposedly elitist Jews there during that time. During the time of Jeremiah, for instance, the Jews simply, the priests were keeping kosher. They were keeping the orthodoxy, rabbinical orthodoxy, whatever, all the holidays correct, but they treated the fellow Jew miserably. And God does not care about sacrifices if you're treating your fellow Jews that are vulnerable, like women and children, the proselyte, the Baal Teshuva, converts and things like that. Not releasing your bondservants after the year of Jubilee, etc., etc. This kind of thing, no matter how righteous you think you are and you think you're doing everything right in God's sight, well, God sees the inner person of man's heart, okay? Verse 5, more comparisons here. Did the thieves come upon you? Did plunderers in the night? How were you silent? Will they not steal? Will not steal until they have enough? If vintagers came upon you, would they not leave over some of the gleaning grapes? There's other commentary. I'm not going to get into a lot of that, but essentially when it says, how were you silent? Why were you sleeping soundly and still until they stole everything you had? So you have people that are making assumptions. They're not being proactive. They're being reactive. And you have people that unwisely put up, they're hoarding, grapes and wine and grain and things of this nature, and they're sleeping soundly and not worrying about thieves and invading nations taking everything away. When this is what God's talking about. But in the end, you will be left with nothing. Totally destitute and poor. Now, verse 6, how Esau was searched out, how the hidden things were revealed. Okay, Esau, had availed to him the same righteous training as Yaakov. He was just cut from a different cloth. God knew these two warring nations in the womb of Rebekah, even though they would be born almost at the same time. And Esau technically had the birthright, but he despised that birthright, traded it for a bowl of stew, did not think about eternal inheritance. He did not think about anything, only what he could get from the field through manipulation, through stealing other men's wives, just taking the booty for himself, thinking about the wealth of the land for himself, abusing animals, etc., etc. He had that mindset there. And Yaakov was thinking, he was thinking about the earth too. He was thinking about caretaker of the earth, like Adam and Havilah, sheep herding and proving his sheep herding and the lives of the animals and taking care of his children, his wife, having a relationship with God and prayer and sacrificial offerings and petition and all these things, okay? So you had two different types of brothers here, that Esau had many hidden things in his life that he was ashamed of, but he did not allow that guilty conscience to build up to a point where he had to change his behavior. But God knew everything. Like him purposely going out and marrying Canaanite women when Rebecca and Esau forbade it, okay? So in verse 7, until the border of your lives escorted you, your friends enticed you, you rebelled against you, and your food that they lay as a womb before you, there is no discernment in them. And continuing on, verse 8, shall I not in that day, says the Lord, destroy the wise man from Edom and discernment from the mountain of Esau? Okay, we talked about in the beginning, Prophet Obadiah. He was called for one singular purpose, to preach, to prophesy against Edom. Edom is Esau, the best way to look at that. Because Esau, when he left his father's tent, his father and mother's tent, he went to the land of Seir, and he had multiple wives, and he had many, many, many children, and he intermarried with the kingdom of Seir, and then formed, in the end, the nation of Edom, which was overlooking a high rise like a mountain over other kingdoms. So it was it became a very powerful war state at that time. And through his own wisdom and his own hubris and ego and everything else, he thought he was invincible. And of course, Seir thought they were invincible. And on passages of time when Edom became a military threat to other nations, like Egypt, and per se, they had mighty men, and they were thinking that they could do almost anything without the help of God. Okay, so like in verse 9, it talks of mighty men will be dismayed eventually, the dwellers of the southland, in order that every man be cut off from the mountain Esau by slaughter. The southland, think about the Arabian states like Saudi Arabia and so on, and northern Africa and those areas there too, south of Edom. And it's very interesting here that, in the prophecy that Esau gave his two sons, Yaakov, primarily the biggest prophecy, the inheritance, the blessing, and then Esau, the lesser one. He essentially told Esau, he said, in the short term, Yaakov will be over you. In the long term, Yaakov is going to misbehave and you will be over him. But in the end, God will have the final say with Esau. Okay? He was raised himself high, God will bring him very, very low. Verse 11, it says, on that day from afar, on the day strangers captured the possession, foreigners came into his cities. Edom was completely decimated in the future. You don't hear about Edom anymore today, like the Roman Empire. Verse 12, and you should have not have looked on the day of your brother, the day of the being delivered, and you should not have rejoiced about the children of Judah on the day of their destruction. Esau, not Esau directly, but his generations after him, had a vendetta, like a blood feud. That brotherly jealousy never ended through his ancestors, and they hated Israel. They hated the descendants of Yaakov, and they warred against the nation of Israel. Okay? Getting to the meat of the details here, the climax. Verse 13, you shall not have come into the gate of my people in the day of the misfortune. You too should not have looked at their affliction. In other words, Edom joined the enemies of Israel to punish and to persecute and essentially make the Israelites' lives miserable. Okay? And God, but even though the adversary was using them, and God was using these nation states like Edom and other nations, Moab, to be able to prevail over Israel because of their sin and judgment, they still had free will. And anytime Edom could take advantage of Israel, they would. Their misfortune, just like the Amalekites, okay? That's why we curse the Amalekites even to this day. Verse 14, you should not have stood by the gap to cut off their fugitives, neither should you have delivered their survivors in day of distress. Okay? This is talking to the place to which escapees emerge to escape. In other words, when you have survivors and they're trying to escape for their lives, women and children, people of Edom would seek them out and destroy them and capture them and take everything away from them. So again, take advantage of essentially of the vulnerable of Israel and making their lives miserable and molesting their lives, okay? So in verse 15, the day of the Lord, and then we're talking about the day of the Lord is the world to come, is when God will judge the entire world for their sins finally. Like God judged Sodom and Gomorrah, God's going to judge all the nations as ever persecuted Israel and call the exiles home. That's where I'm getting to. God's word to be heard on the highest of mountain, and Edom thought they were the highest mountain there in that area, in the Levant, looking over all the other tribes of Canaan and everything else, and Israel later on. You know, they thought they were invincible, like the Tower of Babel, right? So, verse 16, for as you drank on my holy mount, and shall all the nations drink constantly, and they shall drink not to be stunned, and they shall be as though they were not. So what we're talking about here is rejoicing on God's holy mount, taking advantage of the weak and the vulnerable, hoarding the produce, the grapes, the vineyards, and things of this nature, taking things away from other people that just did not belong with you. Verse 17, and on Mount Zion there shall be a remnant, and it shall be holy, and the house of Jacob shall inherit those who inherit them. Now what this is talking about is something a lot of people probably not heard. King Nebuchadnezzar II invaded Judea, destroyed and burned the city, essentially, broke down the walls, destroyed King Solomon's temple, and exiled through a series of incremental hostage taking, removing of the calling out of Jerusalem of all the people, taking the nobles, the more princely people first, scholars, artisans, and taking all of them out, and just taking them into Babylonia as slaves, essentially. Okay? This is what King Nebuchadnezzar did, who was the king of Babylonia during that period. But what King Nebuchadnezzar II did, he hired a paramilitary force to do all his dirty work. I think he was concerned about his hands or his men directly, the Babylonians, touching things that could eventually become a curse upon him. What I'm talking about is he did not want to directly burn the temple of God. He heard about the God of Israel in the past. He didn't know if that God was dead or dormant or sleeping. But he sent the Edomites. You heard me. He sent the Edomites from Edom, descendants of Esau, again taking advantage of Jewish people. The slaughtering people of Babylonia were the swordsmen of the Edomites who came in and actually burned the temple and actually desecrated the Holy Land. This is what the verses leading up is talking about. That arrogance, that hubris, or whatever you want to call it, that people think they're invincible, and they don't think their bloody deeds will ever be held account in a court of law. Okay? So verse 18, in the house of Jacob shall be fire, in the house of Joseph flame, and the house of Esau shall become stubble, and they shall ignite them and consume them. So with all the rage of the Edomites poured out, the blood in the streets literally, upon Israel, upon Judea, they will suffer the same murderous rage upon them as well, eventually. Again, Edom was completely destroyed and driven to extinction, essentially by the time of the Roman Empire wrote it, 2,000 years ago. Verse 19 is where I'm getting to the climax here, where I got in trouble with that American Karaite Judaism website by just posting this, what I'm talking about, Obadiah. Verse 19, it talks, the inhabitants of the southland shall inherit the mountain of Esau. So the mountain Esau would be invaded by the inhabitants of the southland, the Arabians, and talking about Arabs, occupiers eventually. Arabs, not Muslims, as you know, because Islam did not come into surface until close to late 6th century, early 7th century. We're talking about Arab people, sons of Ishmael, who some of them had intermarried with Esau, incidentally, their daughters and things like nature. But they actually inhabited the Arabian states, like Saudi Arabia. That's where he went. These Arabs were pre-Islam, and they were polytheistic people. But there also were warring parties, and they wanted to occupy territory and nation states that were vulnerable and laid them to waste. And God sent essentially the sons of Ishmael to come and decimate Edom, or Esau, essentially, to wipe them out. Okay? And it says right here that, the inhabitants of the southland shall inherit the mountain Edom, and the inhabitants of the plain, the Philistines. The Philistines were driven to extinction by the beginning of the Roman Empire, about, I would say, 100, 200 years BCE. Talking about the field of Ephraim, which is northern Israel, the field of Samaria, which is West Bank, and Benjamin, which is essentially northern Judea, inhabitants of Gilead. All these areas will be occupied. And you always heard about the Babylonian exile, the Persian exile, the Greek Empire, the Roman Empire. Then you had again the Persian occupiers, the Arabs essentially, that came in and occupied these areas over again. And this is just prophetic writings. And these things have already transpired. Most of this is transpired. But what is even more interesting in verse 20 is where I got into trouble. Verse 20 says, and the exiled hosts of the children of Israel, who are with the Canaanites as far as Zarephath, and the exile of Jerusalem, which is in Sepharad, shall inherit the cities of the southland. Now, what are these cities talking about? What are these people talking about? Well, in the Talmud and rabbinical commentaries, and also I asked my smart Alexa, in my home, give me the Hebrew word for the nation of France. Give me the Hebrew word for the nation of Spain. Well, believe it or not, the word Zarephath refers to French people of France in the current age. Okay, France has not always been France, and Spain was not always Spain either. But they were called different areas. Sephardim or Sephardi Jews came primarily from Iberian Peninsula before it became Spain. So you have here Obadiah looking far in the future in his night visions. He's talking about exiled Jews that went as far north as up in France, and went as west as Spain, Iberian Peninsula, and they will be called home as exiles when the final judgment against Edom, against Esau, and all their contributors, whoever aided them, whoever they may be. And you hear about Iran and the mullahs and everything else. You hear about Iraq. You hear about Saudi Arabia. You hear about Jordan and other Arab states here. They have different opinions on Israel. Some of them want to divide up Israel in little pieces. Others want to just destroy the Jewish people completely. So these are descendants, essentially, of Esau that is still plaguing the world. We can call this the curse of Amalek, or the spirit of Amalek, or the spirit of Nazism, however you want to look at it. But believe it or not, this Karaite Jew, humble Karaite Jew, got kicked out of this Facebook group. And don't think any friends you on Facebook are your true friends, okay? I'm not going to give his name, but I was very disappointed in this individual who was the admin of this group. And he had cliques among that group, and he had favorites with that group, and they were complaining because I posted this prophecy of Obadiah, which said that God was talking about exiled Jews in France and Spain. And what they said in conclusion, and bring this around home, I know it's been long-winded, they said it's impossible that Obadiah was talking about France and Spain because they didn't exist anymore. I said, wait a minute. Obadiah was a futurist. He was a prophet, and he used words that he didn't know. It was ridiculous in his time. He did not know what these words were. He didn't know what Sepharad was. He didn't know what the Hebrew word for France was. He didn't know. But he wrote copiously, meticulously what Elohim gave him the right for the future. For the future. I even had one Karaite Jew said that Obadiah must have been a liar. Yeah, you heard me. Must have been a liar because God called him to prophesy against Edom. Why talk about exiled Jews in these two areas here that were exiled by Babylon? I already told you the relationship between Babylon and Edom. Babylon King Nebuchadnezzar II hired the Edomites to do his dirty work and ruthlessly rape and destroy Jerusalem, and King Solomon's first temple, and burn everything to the ground and slaughter the populace there, mercilessly. So you see how this works here, okay? Verse 21, the saviors will send Mount Sinai to judge the mountain of Esau, and the Lord shall have the kingdom. And this is pretty much the end here of these verses, how it ends up. That the nice guys do finish last, but they finish great, right? And even though Edom is not Edom anymore, you don't hear about Edomites anymore, like Canaanites, you don't hear about them anymore. But, their descendants are spread through DNA, migration trails throughout the Arab world and the Middle East, okay? They really are, okay? The Hashemites actually formed the Jordanian monarchy there and everything else. They have a vicious hatred against the Jewish people, even though there's a stupid peace treaty that was signed in 1994, and I'm totally against that. The thing is that to be an honest servant of the Lord our God, you are to speak truthfully, even though you will lose your friends in the process. I believe verbatim what Obadiah said. Now, I can debate when he was born and when he gave his prophecies. That's debatable. 800 BCE, 600 BCE. It's not really that important. What's important is that the words that God gave him were divine then, and they're generationally important today. So what I'm saying, what Jews exiled today in Spain, and still a lot of Jews in Spain and France, for example, and these are just geographic symbol nations there that had large population at the time of Obadiah. They were not called Spain, of course. Were not called France, but these are two geographic regions that were known by merchants and shipping people, cartographers and people that actually drew maps. They knew about these places, but they were Jews that were exiled from the Babylonia, essentially the Babylonian attack by through Edomites upon Jerusalem, you know. They will eventually come home. And these are examples again. We have about 14.5 million Jews on the planet, about 9 million in Israel, 8.5 billion, more or less. The majority of all Jews are still in exile, self-imposed exile, in the diaspora, as we call it. There's more Jews in Brooklyn, New York, than in Israel, believe it or not. There's a lot of Jews scattered throughout the planet. And there will be a time that they will be called home to Israel in the day of the Lord, whenever that is. May the Mashiach come quickly. When these Jews that Obadiah, get this, whether 600 BCE or 800 BCE, prophesied, get this, exiled Jews in France and Spain will be called home to Israel. I think their ancestors there, those particular nations, are very, very significant without reading in too much in this, as far as the reconstitution of the 12 tribal states of Israel. Well, I've said it, and I have not been stoned by saying it. You know, I believe in every word of the Tanakh. I believe every word of the prophets. I believe every word that Moshe said. God is not a liar, and his prophet is not a liar. You know, for you to be a prophet of God, you have to be 100% accurate all the time. You're not like Nostradamus. You can't guess. You can't, play tarot cards or crystal ball or talk to witches or fortune tellers, whatever. You have to be 100% right. And that's why I believe in the words of God are true, even though I'm a man of science. In conclusion, I believe in the words of truth of Obadiah. Who's probably more respected, believe it or not, by Christians, than Jews, because they have, in Greek Orthodoxy, they have, in Russian Orthodoxy, they have certain calendar days in which he is in high esteem and memorial, right? Don't curse the prophets of God. Don't curse God. If you curse words of a prophet of God and you doubt them and you go on public media and you share that doubt, it is blasphemy, folks. You're creating another image of Elohim by saying this prophet, just because you're not, what he's saying is not convenient for your understanding today, your finite understanding, is a form of adultery and is blaspheme the holy name of God, and it's an abomination. It really is. Only atheists say that the prophet Daniel had to be born during the time of Judah Maccabee. We're going to have Hanukkah very soon, for his prophecies to sync up with reality, because it would be impossible that he was exiled at Babylonia giving these prophets about the rise and fall of Babylon, Persia, the Greek Empire, and the Roman Empire. Atheists have to have these compromises of 50 shades of gray for everything to fit in their narrative that there is no God. There's no religious, all this is religious nonsense, right? Anyway, I'm right here to tell you that God is right. We are wrong. He has a red line. Choose a side. Be on the side of God and live a righteous, prosperous, happy, and healthy life. Shalom Aleichem. Rabbi ben-Emmett signing out. Please share the knowledge and wealth and love and truth. Everyone willing to hear it. If they resist that truth, you live that truth. Remember, a tree is known by the fruit it bears, not the tree that says, I taste like a lemon, but you're actually an orange tree, right? Do not be a hypocrite. And if you're a parent, you have children, that's even more important, because that light of innocence in your children's eyes, that is the light of God. And remember, you are all our emissaries and ambassadors. Especially if you're a Jew, into the rest of the world, you are like a prophet. You are that image of God before, as witnesses, before a world that's totally ignorant and totally lost. It is critically important that you treat people with equity and love and kindness, as diverse as we are, to treat them all, whether Jew or Gentile, as something that's precious and beloved. Because we all came from the three sons of Noah, right? And we all will be judged the same in the end, right? Take care. Shalom Aleichem, and I will see you real soon. I hope you enjoyed about the story of the prophet Obadiah. Very scandalous story, and for some circles, but still a prophet of God. Therefore, I say Amen.